Today is June 19th, 2023, and this is Ted Doskaris, and I'm going to talk about the differences with the now available Bachmann three-axle motor block that used in the Aristo-Craft three-axle locomotives like the Dash 9. So these parts are now available. I happened to buy a pair of these new replacement motor blocks from Robbie at RLD Hobbies, and that's this picture here. And so I set up, I'm going to talk about the differences I found. And I have a setup here with a power supply, and I have an Aristo-Craft motor block here, and I have here the new Bachmann motor block. And I discovered, and of course Robbie fortunately forewarned me so I wouldn't have to find out the hard way. He said that the wheels rotate the opposite way with the Bachmann motor block compared to the Aristo-Craft motor block. So that saved me some time in finding out the hard way. And of course, that has implications because at first he said, well, if you replace one motor block, they would obviously go in the opposite directions. So he started the conversation about having to buy a pair. So that led to the questions as how to deal with it. So at any rate, how I dealt with it is to take the Bachmann motor block apart, and you can take the bottom cover off, and you can lift out the motors, and then rotate them 180 degrees. They're DC motors, and they have a little red dot in the polarity of the motor, and you can rotate them 180 degrees and then put them back in. And so that's the way I prefer to do it. But I think Robbie's thinking was, well, you just change the wiring in the connectors, and maybe if people have these locomotives, maybe and if they have a decoder in them, I suppose you could change CV values for changing the direction. But then you have to deal with the lights. So if the motors are going one way and it thinks it's going forward when it's really going reverse, that means the headlights and tail lights won't be properly phased with the direction of the locomotive. So that could be a can of worms. So at any rate, I thought I'd demonstrate this thing here. And I have a power supply that's set for 3 volts. And there's the voltmeter. And I have the Aristo-Craft motor block here with the connections here with the red and the black and the red, the minus and plus leads in the same, set up the same way for both these motor blocks. They have an arrow pointing here and here, but it doesn't matter if you turn them around, they'll still go in the same direction because of the wheel rotation with the given polarity here. So you can see here that the Aristo-Craft motor block, there are little tick marks on the wheel. The wheels are going counterclockwise, and the Bachmann rollers I have it on are, of course, going clockwise. And on the new Bachmann replacement motor block, the wheels are going, I should say the wheels are going counterclockwise on the Aristo-Craft locomotive, and the wheels are going clockwise on the Bachmann locomotive. So Robbie was correct. You can see the tick marks are opposite directions here for the 2 motor blocks. And so that's what I wanted to point out, and how you can deal with it. You could change the wiring polarity of the connectors within the locomotive, and that may mean you have to do some soldering or push pins out of the connectors and put them back in, which means take the locomotive apart. Or you can deal with it as I shown here by rotating this thing, there's 2, 4, 6, 8 screws, 2 on each end, and these 2 side screws on either side. You can lift off the cover, and you can pull out all 3 of these axles at the same time and lift the motors out with it. And there are little forks, and these things here where you can't see, there are forks that go down and engage the tabs on the motor in sort of a 90-degree direction. It's probably not the best of design, but that's how they did it as far as contact area. So, and of course, the other issue that came to mind is if these are running backwards with respect to Aristo-Craft, and you have existing Aristo-Craft locomotives, and you purchase a new Bachmann -9, for example, and you have an Aristo-Craft -9, are they going to run in opposite directions? And you know, it's possible they won't, because maybe Bachmann changed the wiring within their locomotive to conform with the way the directionality was on the Aristo ones, but it is food for thought. So there you have it. So now I switched the motor blocks from the Bachmann from one Bachmann to the other Bachmann, where I rotated the motors, and again the polarity is the same on here, and we can see they are both rotating in the same direction. The Aristo-Craft one is going counterclockwise. You can see maybe the tick marks on the Bachmann rollers. It's resting on going clockwise. So the main wheels are going counterclockwise. And now the Bachmann motor block with the rotated motors 180 degrees within is going counterclockwise as well. And the tick marks are going clockwise on the rollers. They go in the opposite directions. so there you have it. That's how I corrected the Bachmann motors, so that I can replace motor blocks in my existing Aristo-Craft locomotives, and they'll go in the same direction as the original design. Just to demonstrate that it doesn't matter which way the motor block is oriented, whether the arrow is pointing this way or that way. In this case, I turned the motor block around, the one that I had rotated the motors in, so they would both go in the same direction. And you can see the arrow is on this side now and on this side. The Aristo arrow is still over here. So you can see they're rotating in the same direction. Being this is the block I had rotated the motor in, or motors, plural. The wheels are turning counterclockwise on the Aristo-Craft one still. That's not changed. And also counterclockwise on the Bachmann motor block that I had rotated the motors in, so that they both are in the same direction. So again, this demonstrates whether or not whether or not I turned the Bachmann motor block around or not, or the Aristo-Craft one for that matter. It's not going to change the way the wheels rotate. You have to, in order to fix the Bachmann motor block so you can use it in existing Aristo-Craft products, you have to rotate the motors within the block so the polarities are reversed from what they are, and they both have to be done, not just one. If you rotate one, it'll fight the other motor, and the wheels won't turn at all, and you'll just draw a lot of current. So there you have it. Now this is the Bachmann 3-axle motor block that I'm going to take apart, and notice it has the USD 437,334 patent number on it. That's a design patent, and that was the last version that Aristo-Craft made, had that number on it, rather than patent pending of the early motor blocks that Aristo had. So Bachmann retained that same mold, and this is the patent here, and it's called the design patent, and it was it's got a 14-year time span. It was filed on March 1st, 2000, so it has since expired because it's past the 14 years. That matters, but at any rate, it's more of an ornamental patent. It shows a figure diagram of the motor block themselves, and the claim is let's see here. It only has one claim. It says the ornamental design for a model locomotive gearbox housing as shown and described. And the last figure shows, figure 8, it's kind of blurred out here or faded out. It shows the relationship, how it is with the 3 motor blocks in the housing that Aristo-Craft has, and now Bachmann has. So I just thought I'd point that out. And so I took the 8 screws out that hold this cover on. There's 2 on each side here, and then 2 on each, 2 on each end. That's 2, 4, 6, 8 total screws. And you can lift this off. That's what it looks like on the inside. And here are the motor blocks. These are the 2 motors. So it has 2 smaller can motors rather than 1 large motor like USA Trains has for their 3-axle block. And the axles, there's an arrow on one side here, and it's on the left side there. And that means that this particular motor block is restricted from rotating, whereas this one, the middle one, and the other end can rotate. So the arrow is meant to point outboard to the pilot end of the locomotive, whether it's on the front of it or the back of it, so it would be opposite, where they decided to have the rigid axle that wouldn't rotate up and down like this. This will be fixed. They do that by having a pad under here, which I'll show. So I'll take time out now to lift these out. There are forks in here. It's hard to see. But there are forks where the tabs on the motors engage the fork prongs. And in this case, Bachmann didn't solder them in. Like Aristo-Craft's last production run, they soldered the forks onto the motor leads. And that created some other problems if they weren't done just right. If the motors weren't pushed down, they would misalign. And if they soldered it that way, then there would be binding action. Then the truck would draw, or the motors would draw a lot of current because they'd be restricted from rotating as well, and you'd have a surging action with the wheels. But the advantage of soldering them is for a better electrical contact, of course. And without soldering them, when you reverse the loco and go forward and then reverse it to go backwards and back and forth, you could conceivably spread the fork prongs out to the point after repeated use that they may not make a good contact. So that's probably why Aristo-Craft soldered them. But Bachmann chose not to do that. So I'll take time out now to lift them out. Before I lift the motors out, I'm going to mark a dot on each one like this with a Sharpie. And the reason I'm doing that is so when they are rotated, I'll know that the dots don't show, because I'm going to rotate them 180 degrees. Because quite often you can have things taken apart and mix it up, and you won't know which way it was. So that's what I do. So I progressively lifted the motor out by, say lift this one in the center and this one and back and forth in the center, and progressively lifted it out. And you can see there are tabs on the motor, each motor. There's the tabs on each end, and they engage these forks in here. These forks here. So, and the motors, I can pull one out. You can see the red dot, so they kind of mark where it's polarized. So if you just rotate it like that, that's opposite. And you don't have to take it apart like this to do that. You can just leave all these things together. And you can see that they have, I guess it's a hex drive that engages inside the motor block right there, or the gearbox housing, I should say. All right. So I'll put it back together and then I'll reinstall it. So I've reseated the motors and the forks. You have to be careful that the tabs engage at a right angle into the forks. And you have to double check, look at it sideways, and see that the motors are even with respect to the housing, and that it hasn't pushed the forks up at a lopsided angle on both sides. So you have to check that. And so this one went together reasonably well. And you can see the dots don't show now, because I had marked the dots before I rotated the motors, just to make sure that I get them phased right. So I'm ready to put the cover back on. And then I'll install the screws and then we'll test it. Okay, so now I've got the motor screwed back together with the 8 total screws around the periphery. And double check this axle will be able to kind of rock back and forth. The center axle will should be able to rock back and forth. And the end axle again is meant to be rigid. I should say the end where it's going to point to the front, because there's the arrow. And so we'll test it now. So put it on the setup. So I'll turn on the power, so I'll connect the connectors first. Same polarity to match the Aristo-Craft one here. Alright, so I'm running it at 3 volts. It's running, and again the Aristo-Craft motor block is going, the wheels are going counterclockwise. And now the Bachmann motor block, the wheels are going counterclockwise too, to match. So there you have it. And I just wanted to point out here, this rail here, this long rail here on both sides, those are for the electrical wheel pickups. These things I call forks are where the voltage is applied to the motor forks that go inside and engage the tabs on the motors. So again, the outside piece of metal here is, and this tab here, and there's one kind of hidden under the clip here, and then likewise for the other wheels. There's a circuit board that these tabs butt against, and the same circuit board inside the A-frame of the Aristo or Bachmann locomotive now. These little prongs will engage that circuit board, and that's, rather than having a plug-in or unpluggable connector, that's how this design is done here, so it kind of makes it friendly. So there you have it. Okay, now what I've done was I've put the Aristo-Craft motor block and the Bachmann motor block with the motors rotated on a track, and I put them on Bachmann rollers, only the outboard axles, because I didn't have enough here to put it on the center axles. And I jumpered the power pickup rails that connect to the wheels on both sides to the motor forks and both of these motor blocks. And at 3 volts, you can see they're not turning. And so if I crank up the voltage, we'll see what happens. So now they're starting to go. So somewhere around 4.5 volts. So I'm setting it to 4.5 volts. And we can see the Bachmann is going counterclockwise with having the motors reversed. And also the Aristo-Craft is going counterclockwise, the wheel here. So that difference between 3 volts and 4.5 isn't much, but it's probably one reason maybe I don't have a power pickup for the center wheels on both of these with another set of rollers. But also it just shows the resistance of the track through the Bachmann rollers, through the tread of the wheel, to the there's like a ball bearing and a spring mechanism behind these that connect to these pickup rails on the top here. So we can see that they both It looks like the Aristo one kind of stopped. There it goes. So at any rate, so you can see that they're now compatible as far as rotational direction. So there you have it. One last issue I would like to mention with these with the Bachmann 3-axle motor block, the wheels tend to be gauged on the high side. In this case, this one end wheel, it measures 1.585 inches back to back. The spec is 1.575 nominal, plus, to my recollection, plus, I think, minus 15 thousandths plus 19 thousandths. So that's within the spec, but it's on the high side. Now, typically, Aristo-Craft, this is the Aristo truck, it's usually undergauged. In this case, it's 1.568 rather than 1.575, so that's notably undergauged. So that's a difference.